It was a grand evening in Vienna, the kind that painted the city in gold and made every corner of the old streets hum with music and laughter. Inside one of the most beautiful concert halls, a soft glow of chandeliers sparkled above the crowd. The air smelled of perfume and polished wood, mixed with the faint sweetness of roses placed along the stage. Elegant people filled the hall, men in black suits and women wrapped in shimmering gowns. They whispered, smiled, and waited for the event to begin. It wasn't just another concert. It was a charity night hosted by the city's most respected patrons. At the center of the excitement stood Leonard Hauer, the man everyone had come to see. He was one of the world's most celebrated pianists, known for his extraordinary performances and his sharp, often prideful charm. When Leonard walked into a room, people turned to look, not only because of his fame but because of the quiet confidence he carried, almost like he owned every space he entered. His reputation as a genius was matched only by his reputation for being proud. Many admired him, but just as many whispered that he had forgotten the humility that once shaped his art. That night, Leonard was in high spirits. The evening had gone perfectly so far. He had performed two of his finest pieces, and the crowd had responded with thunderous applause. Between the soft clinks of champagne glasses, people gathered around him praising his brilliance, his passion, and his unmatched skill. Leonard smiled politely, though deep inside he enjoyed the admiration far more than he admitted. As the evening continued, the event turned lighter and more playful. The host invited Leonard to share a few words with the audience. Standing near the grand piano, he began to joke, making the crowd laugh. "I wonder," he said, his voice echoing through the microphone, "if anyone here dares to challenge me tonight." His tone was teasing, his smile wide. The guests chuckled, shaking their heads. No one in that room would ever think to play against the great Leonard Hauer, but as his gaze swept across the audience, Leonard's eyes caught something unexpected, a young woman standing quietly near the side of the hall. She was not dressed like the others. While everyone sparkled in silk and satin, she wore a plain dress, simple and neat, her hair tied back. She wasn't sitting with the guests. Instead, she stood close to the catering area, helping arrange glasses and trays. She was there to work, not to be seen. Something about her calmness caught Leonard's attention. Maybe it was the way she didn't try to blend in, or maybe the stillness in her eyes, as if she was present in the room but lost in her own thoughts. He raised an eyebrow and said lightly, "What about you, young lady?" The audience turned their heads, surprised. The woman froze, unsure if he was truly speaking to her. Leonard smiled playfully. "Would you like to play something for us? Perhaps show me how it's done." His tone was joking, but his words had a hint of arrogance. Laughter rippled through the room again. Everyone thought it was just a bit of fun. A famous pianist teasing a worker. It was harmless amusement to them. The woman, however, did not laugh. She looked down for a moment, her hands gently brushing the hem of her dress. The silence around her began to feel heavy. Then, with a quiet but steady voice, she said, The room went still. The sound of clinking glasses stopped. Even Leonard looked momentarily surprised, though he quickly regained his composure. He asked, his voice carrying a trace of disbelief. "I used to," she replied softly. There was something about her tone that made people listen. It wasn't pride, it was sincerity. Leonard's smirk returned. "Well then," he said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the piano. "Let's hear you." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some smiled kindly, others whispered behind their hands, expecting a moment of awkwardness. To them, it was just a passing amusement before dessert was served. They couldn't imagine that a woman, dressed so plainly, could possibly play in front of a crowd that worshipped Leonard's music. Elena, though no one in the room yet knew her name, walked slowly toward the grand piano. Her steps were careful but firm. The polished wooden floor seemed to shine beneath her shoes. As she reached the stage, she placed her hand lightly on the edge of the piano. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking at the keys as if greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Leonard folded his arms, curious now. His initial amusement had softened into mild interest. "The stage is yours," he said with a half-smile. Elena sat down on the piano bench. Her posture was simple, untrained in the formal way of professionals, yet there was grace in the way she moved. The murmurs in the hall slowly died down. People leaned forward, waiting to see what would happen. For a few long seconds, she didn't play. Her fingers hovered just above the keys, trembling slightly. It was clear she was nervous, but there was something else too. Something deeper, like a quiet power waiting to be released. Her eyes softened as if memories were flowing back to her. Maybe she was remembering where she first learned to play, or the person who once sat beside her, teaching her to listen before she touched the piano. A faint breeze from an open window brushed through the hall, carrying the soft rustle of curtains. Then she pressed the first key. The sound was gentle, almost fragile, but it held a warmth that spread instantly through the silence. One note led to another, slow and steady like a whisper unfolding into a voice. People who were still holding their glasses forgot to drink. Even Leonard, who had been prepared to hide a smirk, found himself frozen. The music was not grand or complex, but it was pure. It carried emotion, the kind that cannot be taught in conservatories or judged by critics. Every key seemed to tell a story, one that came not from fame or ambition, but from the simple places of life: love, loss, hope, and endurance. Leonard's expression softened as he watched her. Something in her playing felt familiar yet completely new. Her technique wasn't flawless, but her heart guided every note. It wasn't about performance, it was about connection. As the melody deepened, the hall transformed. The laughter, the chatter, the air of luxury, all of it faded into the background. There was only her and the piano, and the quiet breath of everyone listening. It was as if the room itself had begun to breathe with her music. For the first time in years, Leonard felt small, not in a humiliating way, but in a deeply human way, like he was standing before something true and unpolished. The very thing he had lost somewhere along his journey to fame. When she reached the final note, the sound lingered in the air like a soft echo. No one clapped right away. No one spoke. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Elena took a small breath and stood up slowly. She gave a polite nod, as if she had just done something ordinary. Her eyes remained calm, her expression almost peaceful. She turned to leave quietly, returning to her place near the corner as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Only then did the audience begin to move. A wave of quiet whispers passed through the crowd, followed by hesitant applause that grew louder with each passing second. Leonard remained still for a moment longer, watching her retreating figure. He felt something stir within him, a mixture of awe, humility, and a strange kind of guilt. He realized that he had invited her up as a joke, but she had reminded him of what music truly meant. It wasn't about fame, technique, or wealth. It was about soul, honesty, and the ability to move hearts. As the applause filled the hall, Leonard found himself clapping too, but his hands trembled slightly. The evening that began as a display of elegance had turned into something far deeper, an unexpected meeting between pride and humility, between art and truth. And though no one yet knew who she was or where she came from, they all knew one thing: the simple woman had played the piano, and in doing so she had silenced the entire room, not with power, but with the quiet strength of beauty that asked for nothing in return. That night, many would leave the hall with stories to tell. Some would speak of the music, others of the mystery, but for Leonard it was different. As he stood beside the piano long after everyone had left, he knew something inside him had changed forever. It had been 2 days since the charity concert, yet the memory of that evening still played over and over in Leonard's mind like a melody he couldn't let go of. He had performed in countless cities before, received awards, applause, and endless praise. But none of it had stayed with him the way that woman's quiet performance did. He could still see her in his mind, sitting at the grand piano with steady hands and a calm expression, playing with such emotion that the whole room had fallen silent. Leonard had spent years chasing perfection, flawless technique, recognition, and fame. But what she played that night was something beyond perfection. It was real. It came from a place untouched by pride or fear. It was as if her music had spoken a language that everyone understood, but no one had heard in a long time. Even now, in the comfort of his apartment, her music still echoed faintly in his thoughts. That morning, Leonard sat by the window of his music studio, his coffee untouched. The sunlight filtered through white curtains, casting soft shadows on the polished floor. Sheets of music lay scattered across the piano, half-written pieces that no longer inspired him. He tried to play a few notes, but they sounded empty. His fingers were skillful as always, yet his heart wasn't in it. He leaned back and closed his eyes, frustrated. Who was she? He murmured to himself. He didn't even know her name. No one at the event had paid her much attention before she played. When he asked the event organizer later that night, they only shrugged and said she was part of the catering staff. That answer only deepened his curiosity. After years of performing for royalty and high society gatherings, Leonard had come to believe he had seen everything there was to see in the world of music. But that night had shown him how wrong he was. There was something about her, a mystery that tugged at him. He decided he couldn't let it go. He needed to find her, not just out of curiosity, but because something inside him needed to understand. Later that afternoon, Leonard drove to the catering company that had served the event. The receptionist recognized him immediately, standing up in awe. Mr. Hauer, I didn't expect to see you here. Leonard gave a polite smile. I'm looking for one of your staff members. She was working at the charity concert 2 nights ago. A woman who played the piano. The receptionist blinked, clearly surprised by the question. Oh, you mean Elena, she said finally. She's not a regular employee, sir. She only helps part-time when we're short on hands. She lives outside the city in a small town by the river. Leonard's heart lifted slightly at hearing her name. Do you know where exactly? The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded and scribbled an address on a piece of paper. She's quiet but very kind. You might find her at the community center there. She helps teach children in the evenings. Leonard thanked her and left, his curiosity turning into determination. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He just knew he had to see her again. By late afternoon, the city streets gave way to open fields and narrow roads lined with old oak trees. The air smelled fresher here, filled with the scent of earth and river water. After nearly an hour of driving, he reached a small town that looked peaceful and modest, a place where time seemed to move a little slower. He parked near a row of brick houses and followed the sound of children's laughter. It led him to a small community building with faded paint and open windows. Inside, he saw her, Elena, sitting by an old upright piano surrounded by 6 or 7 children. She was showing them how to move their fingers over the keys, her voice gentle and encouraging. Leonard stood quietly at the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. She hadn't seen him yet. There was a calm beauty in the scene, the simple joy of children learning, their faces full of wonder, her eyes warm and patient. The piano was old, some of its keys yellowed with age. Yet when she played a few notes to demonstrate, it still filled the room with warmth. When the lesson ended, the children ran out laughing, their small feet tapping against the wooden floor. Elena turned to close the lid of the piano, and that's when she noticed him standing there. Her eyes widened in surprise, though her expression remained composed. Mr. Hauer, she said softly, her voice calm but curious. I didn't expect to see you here. Leonard smiled slightly, feeling awkward for the first time in years. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to thank you for what you did the other night. You reminded me why I started playing in the first place. She looked at him, studying his face as if unsure how to respond. It was just a song, she said gently. You don't have to thank me. But it wasn't just a song, he said quickly. Everyone felt it. You played with something I can't even describe. Elena smiled faintly, her eyes kind but distant. Music speaks differently to everyone, she said. Maybe you just heard something that was missing for a while. Her words hit him like a quiet truth. He didn't know what to say. For years, Leonard had believed that mastery and discipline were everything, that a musician's worth was measured by the perfection of their performance. But this woman had shown him that sometimes true beauty comes from imperfection, from honesty. Do you teach here often? He asked, looking around the small room. Every afternoon, she said. The children here can't afford private lessons, so I come when I can. My father used to teach me when I was young. He believed music should belong to everyone, not just those who can pay for it. There was a pause between them, filled only by the sound of wind moving through the trees outside. Then, as if she sensed his lingering curiosity, she added quietly, My father was a pianist too. Before the war, he played in theaters. After he lost his hands, he taught me instead. He said that even when life takes something from you, it gives you another way to express what's inside. Leonard listened carefully, moved by her words. He wanted to say something comforting, but he realized she didn't need sympathy. She spoke with acceptance, not sadness. "You must miss him," he said softly. "I do," she replied, her voice gentle. "But every time I play, I feel like he's still here." The simplicity of her words carried a depth that struck him deeply. He had spent years surrounded by fame and critics, by grand halls and shining lights, but none of it had ever felt as real as this small room, this conversation. After a moment, Elena turned to him and asked quietly, "Why did you really come here, Mr. Hauer? You don't seem like someone who visits small towns often." Leonard gave a small embarrassed smile. "Maybe I needed to be reminded of something. That music isn't just for applause, that it's about people, about feelings. You reminded me of that." Elena looked at him for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Sometimes when we chase too much, we forget why we started. It happens to everyone." Her voice was so steady, so understanding, that it disarmed him completely. He felt as if she had seen through the layers of fame and pride he had built around himself. Before he could respond, a small boy peeked through the doorway, holding a worn music book. "Miss Elena, can I stay and practice a little longer?" he asked shyly. She smiled warmly and nodded. "Of course, Amir, come in." As the boy sat at the piano and began to play, stumbling over a few notes, Leonard watched silently. Elena encouraged him patiently, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the piano, her expression full of quiet pride. Leonard felt something stir within him again, something pure and long forgotten. Watching her, he realized she didn't need an audience or fame to create beauty. She already lived surrounded by it every day. When the boy left, Leonard said softly, "You have a gift, Elena. Not just for playing, but for touching people's hearts. Would you ever consider performing again?" She shook her head gently. "No, I think my place is here. These children need music more than the world needs another concert. I've had my moment and that's enough." Her humility left him speechless. He wanted to insist, to tell her that the world needed to hear her, but he stopped himself. Maybe she was right. Maybe true greatness wasn't about being seen, but about making a difference quietly in the lives of others. As evening settled, Leonard thanked her for her time and stepped outside. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. He stood by his car for a while, breathing in the calm air. The sound of her piano still drifted faintly from the open window, gentle and steady like a heartbeat. Driving back to the city, Leonard felt different. The noise of the city lights and crowded streets no longer impressed him. He had seen something far more beautiful, a woman who found peace in simplicity, who played not for glory but for love. That night, as he sat once again by his grand piano, he tried to play. But instead of his usual compositions, he let his hands move freely, guided by feeling alone. The melody that emerged was soft and full of emotion, inspired by her. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about perfection or applause. He was just playing honestly, completely, humanly. And though she was miles away, he could almost hear her music joining his, blending into something timeless and true. The next few weeks passed quietly, but something inside Leonard had changed. The world around him seemed different now, slower, gentler, and far more meaningful. Every time he sat at his piano, his thoughts went back to the small town, the faded building, and the woman whose music had silenced a room full of pride. Her presence lingered in his mind like an unfinished melody. For years, Leonard had lived for applause. Every concert, every review, every standing ovation had once fed his pride. But now those moments felt empty. The sound of her soft, honest notes had replaced the roar of clapping hands in his heart. He began to realize that maybe success wasn't about being celebrated. It was about creating something that touched another person's soul. One rainy morning, Leonard sat by his window watching the droplets slide down the glass. He had a concert in Paris in 2 weeks, yet the thought of performing in another grand hall no longer filled him with excitement. His assistant knocked gently and entered the room with a schedule in hand. "Sir, the Paris program needs your confirmation," she said politely. "They're expecting a new piece. Do you have something prepared?" Leonard looked at the empty sheets of music on the table. He had started dozens of new compositions in the past month, but none of them felt alive. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he replied softly. "But I will." After she left, he stared at the piano across the room. Its glossy surface reflected his tired face. He thought of Elena again, how she had played so effortlessly as if the piano were speaking through her. He wondered if she was teaching that day, smiling gently at those children, helping them find the courage to press the first note. The thought made him smile faintly. He decided that day he would go back, not to disturb her or to offer anything, but to listen, to understand more deeply what he had lost somewhere along his journey. The rain had stopped by the time he reached the small town again. The streets were damp, shining under the soft afternoon sun. The same children who had been in her class before were running around outside the community center, chasing each other with laughter. When they saw Leonard's car, they stared with wide eyes. To them, he looked like someone from another world. He smiled and waved before stepping out. The door to the music room was open, and he could hear the soft notes of a piano drifting out. When he entered, he saw Elena sitting with a little girl, guiding her hands gently on the keys. The room smelled faintly of chalk and rain. She looked up when she noticed him and smiled politely, though there was a trace of surprise in her eyes. "You came back," she said softly. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he replied. "Not at all," she said, nodding toward the small girl beside her. "We're just practicing scales. Would you like to join us?" Leonard laughed quietly, a bit awkwardly. "I haven't played scales in a long time." The little girl giggled, clearly amused by the idea of a famous pianist struggling with something so simple. Elena smiled, her eyes warm. "Then maybe it's a good time to start again." He sat beside them on the small wooden bench. The piano was old, its keys uneven, but it had a charm that no expensive instrument could match. As the child played slowly, missing a few notes here and there, Elena encouraged her with gentle words. "Don't worry about mistakes," she said kindly. "Every wrong note teaches you where the right one lives." Leonard listened closely. Her words weren't just for the child, they touched something deep within him too. For so long he had feared mistakes, avoiding them as if they could destroy his career. But watching her, he began to realize that mistakes were part of the journey. They made the music human. When the lesson ended, the little girl ran off happily. Elena closed the piano lid and turned to him. "You came all this way again," she said softly. "Why?" He hesitated before answering. "Because I haven't been able to forget that night. Your music changed me. I thought I understood everything about playing the piano, but you showed me I understood nothing." She looked at him quietly, then smiled faintly. "Maybe you understood more than you think. Sometimes when we stop searching so hard, the meaning finds us on its own." Her calmness both comforted and challenged him. He wanted to ask her 100 questions. How she learned to play that way, what inspired her. But he sensed she wouldn't explain it easily. She wasn't someone who believed in showing off or turning life into lessons. She simply lived what she believed. They walked outside together where the air smelled fresh after the rain. The children were still playing by the field, their laughter echoing through the quiet town. Leonard watched them for a while, then said, "Would you mind if I stayed for a few days? I'd like to help teach the children if you'd allow it." Elena looked surprised but not opposed. "You, teaching children?" He chuckled. "I might be terrible at it, but I'd like to try. I think I've forgotten how to share music instead of performing it." After a moment, she nodded. "If you're willing to learn patience, then yes, the children would love it." And so over the next few days, Leonard stayed. He arrived each afternoon, sitting among the children as if he were one of them. He helped tune the piano, carried small stools, and sometimes played short melodies for them to follow. The children adored him, though they didn't fully understand who he was. To them, he was just Mr. Leo, the man who smiled too often and forgot to scold them when they hit the wrong key. Elena watched quietly, often amused. It was strange seeing a man known for his perfection learning to laugh at mistakes. He fumbled with teaching, stumbled over simple explanations, and at times made the children laugh more than he taught. But each day, something softened in him. He began to find joy in the small things, the sound of laughter, the clumsy but pure effort of the children, and the quiet satisfaction of helping someone learn a single note. One evening, after the lessons ended, Elena stayed behind to clean up. Leonard lingered too, pretending to rearrange some music sheets just so he could stay longer. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of crickets outside. "I used to think music was about proving myself," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I practiced until my fingers hurt, just so people would applaud. But now, after spending time here, I realize that applause fades. What stays is how you make people feel. Elena looked at him, her expression soft but serious. You found your truth, she said. That's not easy. He smiled slightly. Maybe I'm just late to understanding it. It's never too late, she replied. They sat in silence for a moment, the golden glow of sunset filtering through the window. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. For the first time, Leonard felt as though he didn't have to be anyone special. He could just be a man who loved music and found comfort in another person's presence. After a while, he turned to her and said, You know, I've been trying to compose something new, but everything I write feels lifeless. I think I need to learn how to play like you, how to feel again. She smiled gently. Then stop trying so hard. Don't think of the notes. Think of what you want to say without words. That's where music begins. Her words stayed with him long after he left that evening. That night, back in his small inn room, he sat at an old piano by the window. He began to play, not from a sheet, not from memory, but from the quiet emotions she had awakened in him. The melody that came out was simple and fragile, yet it felt alive. He closed his eyes and let it flow. The next day, he played the new piece for her. It wasn't perfect, and he knew it. But when she listened, her eyes softened with emotion. Now, she said softly, you're speaking through your music again. He looked down, humbled. You helped me find it, she shook her head. No, you just needed to remember. It was always there. Over the next week, the two of them continued teaching together. They became a quiet team, she guiding the children with patience and he showing them the passion behind every note. Sometimes they played together, and the children would sit in awe as their melodies intertwined like two rivers flowing into one. The villagers would stop outside the open window just to listen, drawn by the sound of pure, honest music that filled the air. As the final day of his visit approached, Leonard knew he would soon have to leave for Paris. The thought filled him with a strange sadness. He had traveled all over the world, yet no place had ever felt as real to him as this little town. On his last evening, as the sun dipped low, he walked to the community hall one final time. Elena was there, sitting alone at the piano. She looked up when he entered, her eyes gentle but knowing. You're leaving tomorrow, she said quietly. He nodded. Yes, Paris is waiting. There was a pause. Then she smiled softly. Don't forget what you learned here. I won't, he said firmly. And I'll make sure the world hears your music, even if you never step onto a stage again. She shook her head. You don't have to. My music already lives here. She touched her heart lightly, then the piano. And maybe now it lives in you too. He smiled, his throat tight with emotion. It does. That night, as he drove away, he could see the faint glow of the community hall in his rearview mirror. The sound of her piano followed him into the distance, a melody so full of life and love that it stayed with him long after the road disappeared behind him. For the first time in years, Leonard didn't feel like the great pianist everyone adored. He simply felt human, and that was more beautiful than any applause he had ever received. The days after Leonard returned to the city passed strangely quietly. The glittering halls, the applause, and the familiar rhythm of his life seemed almost unreal compared to the small town and the music he had experienced there. Every time he sat at his grand piano in his apartment, the notes felt hollow. His hands moved as they always did, fast and precise, but they lacked the warmth, the soul that Elena's music had awakened in him. He began to think of her constantly. Not just her music, but the way she lived, so simply, so completely, and yet so deeply connected to life. The idea that someone could find joy in giving and sharing music without recognition or reward felt revolutionary to him. Leonard had never met anyone like her. He realized that he had been performing his whole life without truly connecting, playing for fame rather than feeling. One afternoon, he received a message from a music publisher inviting him to perform at a high-profile gala. It promised media coverage, critics, and influential attendees. Normally, he would have accepted immediately, but he paused. Could he perform the same old pieces with the same old pride after everything he had experienced? The thought of playing without heart felt unbearable. He decided to compose something new, something inspired by his time in the small town. He pulled out a blank sheet of music and sat at the piano. He closed his eyes and let his memory take him back. Elena teaching a little girl to play, guiding her hands, laughing softly as the child stumbled over the keys. The way she encouraged every mistake as a step toward learning, the warm sunlight falling through the windows of the old music room. The notes started slowly, uncertain at first. He stumbled over some passages, remembering Elena's gentle advice that mistakes were not failures but steps forward. He began to play from his heart, letting every feeling he had experienced pour into the music. It was raw and imperfect, but it was alive. Days turned into nights and nights into days as he worked tirelessly. For the first time, he wasn't trying to impress anyone or chase recognition. He was composing for the sake of music itself, for the memory of her, for the purity of the emotion that had touched him so profoundly. Word of his upcoming gala spread quickly, and the city buzzed with anticipation. But Leonard found himself disconnected from the excitement. He was no longer eager for applause. He wanted authenticity. He wanted to perform music that mattered, music that spoke, even if only to a single person. Finally, the night of the gala arrived. The hall was magnificent, draped in gold and crystal, filled with elegantly dressed guests. Leonard walked to the stage, feeling the usual mixture of nerves and pride, but underneath it all was a quiet determination. Tonight he would play differently. Tonight he would play for the music itself, for the feeling that Elena had taught him to recognize again. As he sat at the grand piano, he paused for a moment, letting his hands hover above the keys. He could hear the soft hum of the audience settling, the rustle of gowns and the quiet murmur of conversations. He closed his eyes and remembered the small music room, the laughter of children, the gentle guidance of Elena. His fingers began to move. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but they carried a warmth that filled the hall. The melody was simple, delicate, yet full of emotion. The audience, expecting grand displays of virtuosity, fell silent. They had come to see a famous pianist perform, but what they were hearing was something different, something honest, something human. Leonard's hands moved with confidence now, guided by feeling rather than technique. Each note seemed to breathe, to tell a story. He imagined Elena sitting beside him, her calm presence encouraging him to play with honesty. He could almost hear her voice in his mind, reminding him that music was about connection, about touching hearts, not about applause. As he continued, the atmosphere in the hall shifted. The guests, initially polite and reserved, began to lean forward, captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The sound of the piano carried stories of hope, loss, love, and resilience. It was as if Leonard had opened a window to his own soul, letting everyone glimpse the person behind the fame. The piece built gradually, not with loud crescendos or dramatic flourishes, but with a quiet intensity that drew the audience in. Each note seemed to carry a fragment of the experiences he had shared with Elena, the small joys, the lessons, the sense of wonder he had rediscovered. People who had come expecting entertainment were now moved in a way they had not anticipated. Some wiped tears from their eyes, others held their breath. Absorbed by the honesty of the performance, Leonard played for what felt like an eternity, lost in the music until the final note hung in the air, soft and lingering. The hall was silent. The usual chatter, the polite coughs, even the rustle of clothing seemed to have vanished. In that moment, time itself felt suspended. Then slowly applause began. At first tentative, almost unsure, but it grew steadily, spreading through the room like a wave. Leonard opened his eyes and saw the faces of the audience. Many of them moved to tears, smiling, leaning forward with admiration. But the applause was different this time. It was not for his technical skill alone, but for the emotion, the honesty, the human connection that had flowed through the music. After the performance, Leonard stepped back from the piano, breathing heavily. He felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known, deeper than any standing ovation or award. He realized that he had finally understood what Elena had shown him, that music was not about perfection or recognition, but about touching the hearts of others. Backstage, colleagues and organizers praised him enthusiastically, trying to analyze the performance in terms of skill and technique. Leonard smiled politely, but he knew they could not grasp the true meaning of what had happened. He had played for something far greater than applause. Later, as he left the gala and walked through the quiet streets of the city, Leonard thought about Elena. He wished she could have seen the performance, not for his sake, but because he knew she would have understood the journey he had taken. He wanted to find a way to thank her, to show her that her music had not only touched him but had changed the way he saw the world. The following days were filled with invitations, interviews, and discussions about the performance. Critics wrote about the emotion in his music, praising a depth and warmth they had never noticed before. But Leonard felt detached from the accolades. He knew the truth, that the real change had happened not on the stage but in his heart. He began to incorporate the lessons he had learned into his daily life. He played differently even when alone. He listened more, noticed the small details, and sought genuine connection rather than validation. Music became a conversation, a bridge between himself and the people who heard it. Leonard also realized he wanted to share this understanding with others, just as Elena had shared with the children. He started organizing small workshops in the city for young, aspiring musicians, focusing not on technical perfection, but on feeling, expression, and the joy of music. He encouraged mistakes, celebrated effort, and helped his students discover their own voices. Through these workshops, Leonard met people from all walks of life, children from humble backgrounds, adults who had forgotten how to play, and even other professional musicians who had lost their way. He found immense satisfaction in guiding them, not as a famous pianist but as someone who had learned the value of genuine expression. The memory of Elena continued to inspire him. Every melody he composed, every lesson he taught carried a trace of her wisdom. Her influence had awakened something in him that could not be contained. It shaped the way he approached music, life, and relationships. Months later, Leonard received a letter from the small town. It was from Elena. She wrote simply describing how she continued teaching, how the children were learning and growing, and how music filled their lives. She mentioned that she had heard about his gala performance from the local newspaper and was glad to know that he had rediscovered the joy of playing. Leonard read her words over and over, feeling a warmth in his chest. He wrote back, expressing gratitude, admiration, and the profound impact she had on his life. Their letters became a quiet correspondence, a bond formed through music, respect, and mutual understanding. Through these letters, Leonard learned more about her world, the simplicity, the struggles, the beauty in ordinary moments. He realized that true inspiration often came from unexpected places and people. Elena had shown him that life did not need to be grand or public to be meaningful. It only needed sincerity and love. As time passed, Leonard continued to perform, teach, and compose, but his approach was forever changed. He no longer sought the approval of critics or the applause of audiences. Instead, he played for connection, for honesty, for the moments when music could touch a heart and change a life. He remembered every lesson Elena had imparted, every moment in the small town, every note that had silenced a room and awakened something in him. He understood that greatness was not in recognition, but in the ability to inspire, to move, and to share something true with the world. And though he was miles away from that small town, he carried it with him in every note he played, in every lesson he taught, and in every person he touched with music. The quiet woman who had played the piano so simply yet so profoundly had forever changed the course of his life. And through him, her influence would continue to reach far beyond what either of them could have imagined. The world had seen Leonard Hauer as a brilliant pianist, but now those who listened closely could hear something else, a depth of feeling, a sincerity that spoke to the soul. And in every performance, in every gentle note, he carried the echo of her music, reminding everyone that true artistry comes not from recognition, but from the heart. Even years later, when Leonard looked back on his life, he remembered that night in Vienna and the small town afterward not as a turning point in fame or fortune, but as the moment when he discovered the true meaning of music, connection, honesty, and the quiet power of a single person's heart. No one could have predicted that a simple woman, standing quietly in a crowded hall, would change the life of a world-famous pianist forever. Yet, through her music and her example, she had done exactly that, teaching him and everyone who heard him after that beauty lies not in perfection, but in authenticity, and that sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest impact. Leonard's life had begun to change in ways he could never have imagined. After returning from the small town, he found himself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The world around him, the glittering streets of the city, the endless invitations, and the bright lights of fame, no longer held the same allure. He had tasted something far deeper, the quiet power of music that came from the heart, not the applause. He spent hours each day at his piano, experimenting with melodies that were no longer meant to impress but to express. Some mornings he would play softly, letting the music flow like a gentle stream. Other times he would lose himself in powerful chords that seemed to echo his own emotions, the frustrations and joys of years spent chasing perfection. Every note carried a story, and he discovered that playing in this way brought him peace he had never known. One afternoon, as Leonard was working on a new piece inspired by the small town and the children he had taught, he received an unexpected visit. It was from one of his oldest friends, a fellow pianist who had traveled the world with him and shared countless concerts. "You've changed," his friend said, looking at him carefully. "There's something different in your music. And in you," Leonard smiled faintly. "I've realized that I was playing for the wrong reasons. For applause, for recognition. I forgot why I fell in love with music in the first place," his friend nodded, understanding. "You sound alive again. I haven't heard you play like this in years." Leonard paused. "It's because of someone I met, a woman. She's not famous, not celebrated, but she reminded me what music truly is. Her name is Elena." As he spoke about her, he realized how profoundly she had influenced him. He didn't just remember her music. He remembered her humility, her kindness, and the way she shared her knowledge freely. It was a lesson that went far beyond piano lessons. Soon after, Leonard decided he needed to return to the small town. Not for a concert, not for recognition, but to reconnect and to see her again. He wanted to understand more, to learn from her, and perhaps to show her how much she had inspired him. When he arrived, the town looked just as peaceful as before. The children ran through the streets, waving at him with familiarity and joy. Leonard felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The community center stood quietly, sunlight spilling through its windows. Inside, he found Elena sitting at the piano, surrounded by students once more. She looked up when she noticed him, and a small smile played on her lips. "You've returned," she said simply. "I had to," Leonard replied. "I needed to see you again. I wanted to learn more, and to thank you properly." Elena nodded, her calm presence steadying him. "You've changed already. You don't need to learn more. You just needed to remember." They spent the day together, teaching children side by side. Leonard felt a sense of joy in the simplicity of the tasks, adjusting stools, helping children place their fingers correctly on the keys, encouraging them when mistakes happened. He had spent so many years performing on grand stages, yet these small moments brought him more fulfillment than any standing ovation ever had. As the day ended, Elena closed the piano and looked at him. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. "The music isn't just in the notes. It's in the heart, in the life you live, in the people around you. That's what makes it last." Leonard nodded, moved. "I think I understand now. I think I finally understand what you showed me that night in Vienna." She smiled faintly. "Then you're ready." For the first time, Leonard realized that she wasn't just teaching him about music. She was teaching him about life. The way she approached everything, her humility, her kindness, her patience, was a lesson in itself. He had spent decades chasing perfection, but she had shown him that perfection meant nothing without heart. Over the next few days, Leonard stayed in the town, not as a famous pianist, but as a student of life and music. He played alongside Elena not to perform but to feel, their music intertwined, creating melodies that carried the weight of experience and the lightness of joy. The children listened wide-eyed, learning not just the notes but the feeling behind them. One evening, after the last student had left, Leonard and Elena sat together at the piano. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the instrument. He began to play a simple melody, inspired by the laughter of the children and the peace of the town. Elena listened silently, nodding slightly, encouraging him without words. When he finished, he looked at her. "I never knew music could feel like this," he said. "I thought it was about skill, about applause. But now I understand. It's about connection, about honesty, about touching someone's heart." She smiled warmly. "And you've found it. You've remembered what many forget. Music is not just sound. It's life, and it lives wherever it's shared honestly." Leonard felt tears prick his eyes. For so long, he had believed that fame and recognition were the measures of success. But here, in a quiet town with a woman who played simply yet profoundly, he had discovered a deeper truth. He realized that all the years he had spent chasing applause were years lost to fear and pride. The next morning, Leonard received a letter from the city. It was an invitation to perform at a prestigious international festival. Normally, he would have accepted immediately, but he paused. He thought of Elena, of the children, of the quiet moments of learning and sharing. He realized that he didn't want to perform for fame anymore. He wanted to perform for meaning. He wrote back, declining the offer politely, explaining that he had found a different path, one where music was shared, felt, and lived, not measured by critics or crowds. He knew some would call it foolish, but he didn't care. For the first time, he felt truly free. Days turned into weeks, and Leonard continued to spend time in the town. He organized small concerts for the villagers, teaching them that music was not only for the elite or famous, it was for everyone. People of all ages gathered to listen, to learn, and to play. The town streets were filled with the sound of music and laughter, a rhythm that connected the community in a way Leonard had never seen before. One afternoon, while walking through the town, Leonard stopped by the river. The water reflected the golden sunlight, and he thought of the journey he had taken, from the glittering halls of Vienna to this quiet, humble place. He realized that true greatness was not measured by fame or fortune, but by the ability to inspire, to teach, and to touch the hearts of others. He thought of Elena, her music, and the lessons she had imparted. He understood that her gift was not just in her playing, but in the way she lived. Her generosity, her humility, her patience, and her unwavering belief in the power of music to heal and connect. He felt gratitude beyond words for having met her, for having been shown a path he never would have discovered alone. That evening, Leonard returned to the community hall. Elena was there, quietly playing a piece he had never heard before. The music was soft, delicate, and full of emotion. It told a story of resilience, of hope, of quiet strength. Leonard listened, feeling the depth of her soul in every note. When she finished, she looked at him and said, "You've grown, Leonard. You've learned to listen not just to the notes, but to life itself." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I have," he replied, "and it's because of you. You've changed the way I live, the way I play, and the way I see the world." Elena smiled gently. "Then my work here is done," but Leonard knew it was not done. Her influence would stay with him forever, guiding his music, his teaching, and his life. He had been given a gift far greater than any applause or recognition, the gift of understanding what it truly meant to play, to share and to live with honesty and heart. The next day, Leonard decided to stay in the town a little longer. He wanted to continue learning, to continue teaching, and to continue experiencing life in a way he had never known before. Every day was filled with small joys, the laughter of children, the beauty of a simple melody, the peace of living in a community connected by music and kindness. He also began to compose again, creating pieces inspired by the town, the river, the children, and Elena. Each composition carried a story, a piece of his journey from pride to humility, from fame to authenticity. He shared these pieces with the villagers who listened with wide eyes and open hearts. Leonard realized that true music was never about showing off, about perfection, or about accolades. It was about sharing, connecting, and expressing what words could not capture. Elena had taught him that. She had reminded him that even the simplest song, played with honesty and love, could change lives. One afternoon, as he sat by the piano with Elena, he said quietly, "I used to think that the stage, the applause, the fame, that's what mattered. But now I know it's about people, about feeling, about touching hearts. Thank you for showing me this." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "You didn't need me to show you. You only needed to remember. The truth was always inside you." Leonard nodded, feeling the depth of her words. He understood now that music was not a career, not a competition, not a pursuit of glory. It was life itself, expressed through sound and shared with others. As the sun set over the small town, Leonard felt a sense of peace he had never known. He realized that his journey had only just begun, not as a famous pianist, but as someone who understood the true meaning of music. Through Elena, through the children, and through the simple, honest joy of playing, he had found a new life, one filled with purpose, connection, and heart. And in that quiet moment, with the golden light spilling over the piano keys and the soft sound of the river nearby, Leonard knew that he had discovered something far more valuable than fame or fortune. He had discovered the true power of music, the ability to heal, to inspire, and to remind people of the beauty that exists in honesty, simplicity, and love. The woman who had once silenced a room with her music had done more than that. She had changed a life, awakened a soul, and shown the world that the most profound artistry comes not from recognition, but from the heart. And Leonard knew that he would carry this lesson with him forever. In Every, the story of that night never faded. People still talked about how a world-famous pianist was silenced by the soft, soulful music of a simple woman. Years had passed, but the memory of that evening remained alive in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. Many called it a miracle, others said it was fate. But for the pianist and the woman, it was something more than that. It was a moment that had changed both of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. After their unforgettable duet, their names spread everywhere. Newspapers wrote about the night when a humble woman played music that touched the deepest corners of human emotion. Videos of their performance were shared across the world. People who didn't even understand classical music found themselves crying while watching her play. Her hands, though simple and unadorned, carried stories that words could never tell. The pianist, who had once been known for his skill and fame, was now being praised for his humility and for recognizing true talent when he saw it. But fame was never what she wanted. She avoided interviews, declined TV appearances, and gently turned away from any spotlight that tried to follow her. She returned to her small town, where she lived quietly in her modest home. Every morning she would make tea, open her window, and let the sunlight fall on her old piano. It had scratches and worn-out keys, but to her it was more than an instrument. It was her voice, and the one she had silenced for so long. Now she played again, not for crowds, but for herself, for the peace it gave her heart. The pianist often visited her when his tours allowed. He would arrive without any announcement, sometimes bringing flowers, other times just sitting quietly as she played. Their friendship had grown deep, built on respect rather than fame. He often told her, "You reminded me what music really means." She would only smile and say, "Music was always there. You just needed to listen again." Over time, she started giving free lessons to the children in her neighborhood. Some came from poor families who could never afford proper music classes. She didn't care about payment. For her, it was about giving. She wanted the children to feel what she had once felt, the magic of touching the keys and hearing a world open through sound. Her small living room became filled with laughter, wrong notes, and the pure joy of learning. She would correct them gently, never raising her voice, and always encouraging them to express what they felt, not just what was written on the page. One day, the pianist came by while a group of children was practicing. He stood quietly at the door, watching her guide them. There was a warmth in her voice that reminded him of his own childhood teacher. When the lesson ended and the children left, he said softly, "You've created something special here. Maybe this is more meaningful than all the applause in the world." She looked at him and replied, "The applause fades, but the music stays. If even one of these children carries it forward, that's enough for me." Her words stayed with him long after he returned to his world of concerts and audiences. He began to perform differently. He no longer played just to impress, but to connect. He started including stories in his shows, about life, about people who had taught him lessons. And whenever he spoke of humility and soul in music, he always mentioned the woman who reminded him of its true essence. He never gave her name, only calling her the woman with the golden touch. The audience would always listen in silence, moved by the story. Years continued to pass. Both of them aged gracefully. Her hair turned silver and her fingers grew slower, but her playing lost none of its feeling. Each time she played, it was as if she was speaking to her lost loved ones, the husband and child she had once mourned. The music had become her prayer, her way of keeping their memory alive. Neighbors would sometimes stop outside her house just to listen. They said her piano had a sound unlike any other, one that seemed to come straight from the heart. One winter, the pianist organized a special concert in that same small town where their paths had first crossed. It had been years since their duet, and now he wanted to dedicate an evening to her. The hall was decorated beautifully, the air filled with warmth and anticipation. When she arrived, she didn't know the concert was for her. He greeted her with a kind smile and said, "Tonight we play again." She laughed softly. "My fingers aren't as fast anymore," he answered. "Then let them speak slowly. The world will still listen. When they stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. Many of them had been there years ago, during the night of the unforgettable performance. The pianist sat beside her, and together they began to play. The music was gentle, flowing like a quiet river. It wasn't about speed or perfection. It was about emotion, the kind that made people close their eyes and simply feel. Every note carried warmth, wisdom, and peace. And when they finished, the entire hall stood up in silence before breaking into tears and applause. That night became another moment people would never forget. After the concert, she told him, "Thank you for bringing me back to music. I had lost it for too long." He replied, "You didn't lose it. You were just waiting for the right time to play again." They hugged, and in that moment, it felt like two souls who had completed each other's journeys. Not long after that concert, her health began to decline. Age and time had finally caught up with her. But even as her strength faded, she continued to teach children from her home. The piano stood beside her bed, and every morning she would play a few soft tunes. When the pianist heard about her illness, he came to visit. She was frail but smiling. He sat beside her and said, "You've given music to so many hearts. The world won't forget you." She whispered, "The world doesn't need to remember me. As long as someone keeps playing, that's enough." A few weeks later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. The news spread quietly, but those who knew her felt a deep sense of loss. The pianist attended her small funeral, sitting in silence. When it ended, he stayed behind, looking at her photo placed beside a small piano. He promised himself that he would keep her music alive. In her honor, he started a foundation that provided free music lessons to underprivileged children. He named it the Golden Touch. The foundation grew, and soon branches opened in many cities. Each one had a small framed picture of a simple woman sitting at a piano, smiling. Children were taught not just how to play, but how to feel. They were told that true music didn't come from fame or applause, but from the heart. And each time the pianist spoke at these schools, he would tell her story, not as a tale of sadness, but as one of hope, humility, and rediscovered joy. As years went by, the pianist himself grew old. He continued performing, but always ended each concert with one quiet piece, the same melody she had played that night, the one that silenced the whole hall. When he played it, the lights would dim, and the audience would listen in complete stillness. He closed his eyes every time, remembering the soft smile of the woman who had reminded him what music truly meant. One evening, during his final concert, he spoke to the audience before playing that piece. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "Once I thought music was about perfection, but then I met someone who showed me that the truest music comes from pain, love, and kindness. She taught me that even the simplest heart can hold the most beautiful melody." He then played her song one last time. The hall was silent, just like it had been years ago. People wept quietly, feeling something deep and pure move through them. When the concert ended, he looked up at the sky with tears in his eyes and whispered, "I kept my promise." He knew that somewhere, the woman who had changed his life was smiling too. Her music lived on, in every child who learned to play, in every listener who felt moved, and in every note that carried the warmth of her spirit. The story of the famous pianist and the simple woman became one that parents told their children, not just as a tale of talent, but as a reminder that greatness can come from the quietest souls. And though time continued to move forward, her melody never faded. It lingered, in hearts, in memories, and in every piano that carried the sound of truth and love. In the end, it wasn't about who was famous or who was forgotten. It was about how one act of kindness, one small moment of connection, could awaken something timeless. The pianist learned that music was never about playing for the world. It was about playing for the soul. And that simple woman, who once silenced a hall full of people, had taught him and everyone else that the most powerful music often comes from those who expect nothing in return. Her story lived on, echoing softly, like the last fading note of a song that never truly ends.